that must be my cue, because we're live from Nashville to NOLA with Lindsay and Jimmy. Take it away, guys.
Welcome back to Road Gang Radio. You know, Lindsay Lawler, I got to tell you right now, we actually launched this new platform on Monday. I can't believe it's only been a week we've been on the air. Being on the air, of course, on iHeartRadio. We're on RadioNemo.com. We're on the Tube of You. We are everywhere. We are airware. By the way, I said to myself, I told Claire, who does the programming, we talked about it as well, we got to get Mark Greaney on the show. We got to get him.
It was like the first person. We're like, if we're going to launch a new platform, we can't even conceive of a place where Mark Greaney doesn't exist on it in the very beginning, and he so graciously said yes.
Yeah, I mean, like Kentucky Flatbedder, our good friend Forard, a lot of our regular listeners have been introduced to his books because of this. My dad has become a big fan because of the time he has spent on the show. Not that he needs any more fans. His research for the Gray Man novels included The Chaos Agent, Burner, Sierra 6, Relentless, 1 Minute Out, Mission Critical, Agent in Place, Gunmetal Gray, Backblast, Deadeye Ballistic, On Target, and The Gray Man, of course, has taken him to more than 35 countries, and he's trained alongside the military and law enforcement in the use of firearms, battlefield medicine, close-range combative tactics. With Marine Lieutenant Colonel Rip Rawlins, he wrote the New York Times bestseller Red Metal. He's also the author of the New York Times bestsellers Tom Clancy Support and Defend, Tom Clancy Full Force and Effect, Tom Clancy Commander-in-Chief, and Tom Clancy True Faith and Allegiance. With Tom Clancy, he co-authored Locked On, Threat Vector, and Command Authority. He is a friend of this show, and we are so glad he could make the time for us on this Freaky Feisty Friday morning. Good morning to you, Mark Greaney.
Gray Man's in town!
Hey, good morning. Great to be talking to you guys again.
Thanks for coming back. I feel like, Mark, today, you know, you've been on this show several times. There's not a listener that we have that doesn't know who you are, and I would say there's not a functioning smart person who doesn't know who you are. So I'd love to today take a little time and get to know Mark Greaney, the man, a little better for our listeners, because I love getting to know authors and singers and songwriters for who they are. It makes me like their work better. So if you're up for it, I'd love to do a little Mark Greaney deep dive today. But I thought about you yesterday because we had on this author yesterday named David Singer. His book is From Cab Driver to Carnegie Hall, and which was such a great balance story, #balance story, where he goes one extreme to the other, driving. He sings at Carnegie Hall and then had to fly home real quick to drive a cab. But I love the stories of who we were, what we did that got us to who we are and what we do. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a journey from bartending to bestsellers. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. Totally.
Okay, and there's a lot in between there, of course, I know, but I'm curious what I mean, I think a bartender is the perfect introduction into being an author because, man, the things we hear and the people we meet. But what's one thing that you learned behind the bar that still helps you in your career today, and outside of course, eavesdropping on drunk patrons for awesome stories you can dramatize? But is there something in those skills that you still kind of lean on today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, you can't ignore the fact that if you like people watching and you're very curious about people, like working in the restaurant industry is like a great place for you because it's not only the patrons, but it's also your coworkers. It's a family, and it's not always a family that you love. You know, it has the good and the bad stuff or whatever. So I think that was it. But I mean, honestly, a big part of anybody working in the restaurant industry, it's so much about organizing and prioritizing and just keeping your ducks in a row. And there's so much of that in my job, and so many people that I talk to that want to be writers that are hitting snags. A lot of it is just that stick-to-itiveness and that, I guess you would just say, what I do is put out fires all day. in my job. People go like, "Do you ever get, writer's block?" And I'm like, about 80% of the time.
That's all I do.
I'm completely stymied, and I don't even understand that question. But you've got to, working in restaurants, it's the exact same thing. It's like you have your tables or you have your bar wrapped with people on a Friday night, and you just have to organize and you just have to keep plodding through and moving on, and at some point everybody's going to leave, and you're going to shut down, no matter how crazy it is. And then it's same thing with a book. No matter how far behind you are, or how confused you are on your story, at some point you're going to get to the end of it and get on to the next thing. So it's just that kind of prioritizing life.
I'll tell you this, Mark, and I'm sure you and Lindsay will both be able to relate to this. So back when I was a young man in the city of New Orleans, I started off on the flat top at Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. From there, I actually moved over to the line. From the line, I became the expediter. From the expediter, I became the assistant manager. And then when I got there, I said, I really don't want to do this with the rest of my life. Found that lost shaker of salt and got the hell out of there. But the one thing at the core of it that you kind of just brought up too is it teaches you how to think logistically. It really does teach you to think in ways about that priority you talk about, the idea that I will deal with that later. Right now, I've got to deal with the fact that if I don't flip these burgers, they're going to burn. Right now, if I don't get this plate from under the heat lamp, it's going to dry out. And I do find that in your books, there really is the ability to balance a lot of things and to make sure that the details of like who's getting locked and loaded while simultaneously then cutting back to what the person who is locked and loaded is thinking is a real balancing act, because you can get lost in the weeds of either going too techno or getting too introspective as you kind of play that along. And kind of piggytail off of what Lindsay's talking about. I just wonder at times, do you ever catch yourself while writing having these kind of flashbacks to like, okay, which drink is the toughest to make right now? Which one do I got to prioritize at this moment? And can I pour this draft quickly?
Yeah, I do. Like everything that I've done in my life works into my books in the weirdest little ways. So I've definitely written restaurant scenes that are action scenes, and I think about like, golly, if I was in the kitchen and I was getting chased by guys, I would throw something in that fry vat and run. It's just things of that nature. And but also like in the more like metaphorical sense, it is just as you said, you've got to prioritize and do everything in a certain order. But when you work front of the house, everything can change in a heartbeat. It's probably the same in the back of the house. I never did that, but yeah, it's like no matter what you have in your head, the next 6 things you have to do in quick succession. Some patron grabs you and says, whatever, I need this, or can we change this, or whatever, and you have to just order a whole lot of things in your head. And when I write books, I always feel like, that if you ever saw that movie, A Beautiful Mind, how they sort of did the graphics when he was thinking up formulas of, he would just see things in his head. And it's like, that's sort of how my brain works, except none of it makes any sense to me. So like in the movie, you kind of felt like, well, I can't understand these formulas that the character is seeing, but surely he can. And when I look at it, when I'm thinking of my book, it's very amorphous, and there's very like, yeah, there's going to be something with this, and these things will intersect, but I have no idea how. And it's depressing at certain times of the year. I just want to give my advance back and just forget the whole thing and say, oh, I'll try again next year. And it's the sort of thing like the restaurant business, because you can get so overwhelmed at certain times, and you just have to just keep plugging away.
Keep plugging away, which Mark Greaney does. Mark Greaney, the legendary Mark Greaney, is joining us today. Mark, I read an article from you recently. I think it was in Good Housekeeping. But anyway, you were talking about your own plot twist in your life, and by going on a blind date, being set up and falling in love at 50 and meeting Allison, your beautiful wife, which, by the way, at risk of sounding like a total creeper and stalker, I love following you guys online. You're just like the cutest couple, and I want to be a part of your family, but I won't show up in your bushes. I promise. Well, I don't really promise, but no, it's okay. But I love that article. I love the idea. We love talking about like those moments that change everything, that you're heading in one direction and it's like the plot twist that sends you off in a whole different direction. And I love how you connected that in your own life and in your writing. And what I'm curious about, because I think about, as a songwriter myself, I think about the difference of the songs that I wrote when I was single singing in bars versus the songs that I wrote when I was in a relationship versus being married, the songs that I wrote versus becoming a parent, the songs I wrote, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm curious to you on Father's Day weekend, you meet Allison, everything changes. She has 3 beautiful children that become part of your family. And How does that shift your perspective, or does it? I don't know, but how do you draw in the actually being in a really happy, healthy relationship, supporting and raising these beautiful children? How does that change how you think and write? And do you ever have to go back to single Mark in order to like pull from, to get into your characters, or do you stay in current Mark and just bring that new perspective to it?
Oh, yeah, I like having the multiple different perspectives. First, I have to say something about songwriting, which I'm not a songwriter at all. But when you've had, I thought it was really fascinating when I got divorced the first time, and my life like really changed before I met Allison. It's like every song that I sang along to every day, I realized was like about like infidelity and all these horrible things, and I was like, wow, that stuff didn't mean anything to me. I just thought it was a cool tune, and it's like now song lyrics are killing me right now because so many songs are like sad, and it's just like you have to have the perspective in life to appreciate the lyrics. So good on you for writing that kind of stuff. But yeah, with my books, it is the two things. Like the book I'm writing now, which is a Gray Man novel, involves a lot of family dynamics. My dad died 20 years ago this month, and I miss him every day, and he's a great, great guy, and I want to write about like Court's relationship with his father, who's still alive, and all these things, which probably wouldn't happen if I didn't have that own fodder to draw from. And I've written another series called Armor. It's about very much a family man who also works as a civilian contractor, and then he works for the State Department in security. And that, definitely pulls off the fact that I have 3 stepkids. But there are times where I definitely need to pull back into the solo side of it. Right now I'm in Washington, D.C. doing research on a book, and my wife is here with me, and we've eaten in some really great restaurants that will feature in the book, and we've, gone to some neat places which will feature in the book. But yesterday morning I got up at 5 and I needed to go to this jogging trail just to see if anybody was out there at 5:15 in the morning, because in my book, the Chinese spies meet with their American informants, and I just wanted to see what that would be like at that time of the morning. And so, that was very much a solo thing. My wife wasn't going to do that with me, and my character is going to be alone when he comes across this. So I did that on my own, and it was that right kind of vibe. But I do remember doing research trips alone, which I did. I went to Africa last year alone, and then sometimes Allison goes with me. And it, hopefully the stories, it makes them like more robust and well-rounded. Like I still can pull on, being that solo guy as well as being the family man, and work them both into the stories.
I'm not going to lie. Every time I dig into the world of Josh Duffy, I keep thinking about how much of Mark's married life is actually playing itself through here. I won't lie. It's kind of like that. I always look at those books that way.
Yeah.
And
Hey, we got to ask him, Jim, because we've developed our own little tradition. Jimmy, you, me, Tara. When we're in DC around Christmas, we broadcast live from Arlington Cemetery, and then we like to go to Founding Farmers in DC. I don't know if you've ever eaten there or not, but it's one of our favorites. Farm to table.
I haven't eaten there. It's in Georgetown, right? Is it?
Yeah, there's 2 different ones, maybe even 3. I think there's 2. Anyway, that's my shout out Founding Farmers. That's become our tradition.
Yeah, we actually do.
Good to know.
We do that as a right before Christmas. You should check it out. You talked about the idea of family, and one of the things is these books begin to accumulate, and it's really kind of great, the idea that we meet people who often don't meet in a couple of books, and then they get together. And there's this collection of good guys and their extended families. Do you feel like that part of what world building really is about is not just about building a world of heroes and villains, but building a world of relationships, of people who love each other and care for each other, even if they don't always express it clearly or express it directly? Do you feel like in many ways what you're building here on the page is as much a family as it is a series of action novels?
Yeah, so if you'd asked me that, when I'd written book 1, I wouldn't know what you were talking about. But I'm writing book 15 now, and it's so funny how the stories take on this texture, because I'm very adamant that I never want to write the same book twice, and I don't want it to be this template where, in the first act, the hero survives something and then learns something that's going to lead him into the second act, where the four action scenes will take place, and then in the third, I don't ever want it to be that type of thing. I want to sort of tell the story that I want, and not just try and give people what they had last year. I think a lot of times fans think that they want what they got last year, or that they think they know what they want. And I say that as a reader myself. If I pick up a Tom Clancy novel, I think I know what I want him to say, because I'd read that last year and loved it, or anybody. But it's much better to be surprised. It's much better to be led down a different path. And so I have these characters in the Gray Man series who aren't in every book, as you said. One of the things that was tough for me when I wrote the Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan novels was you kind of had to have all the stars that Tom came up with. You kind of needed to have them in every book. And as the Gray Man series got into, book 6 and book 8 and book 10 and book 14, I had told myself I didn't want, a necessity to kind of like tick off all the boxes with all the characters. So it's fun to have people come back in and relationships morph and change. There's a guy named Zach Hightower in the series who kind of was a nemesis for Court at one point, and now they're very much comrades, and there's reasons for that. That's not just like a plot twist I did, or a thing I did because it was convenient for that particular book. It just sort of made sense to morph that over time, and it's fun. If you're writing 15 books in the series so far, you want them to be different. You'll go crazy writing the same thing, I guess. And so I like to draw on all aspects of human psychology.
I'm going to actually go back to what Lindsay was talking about earlier, because it's been kind of needling at me since she brought it up. Let's talk about restaurants for one more second, not because I want to hear your opinion of what the food is like there.
But because you're hungry.
But no, because they're the best places to write about. I mean, I think about Casablanca. I think about all of the movies and all of the great books. It just feels like when it comes to barrooms and it comes to when it comes to restaurants, particularly when you can give us the POV of either the people behind the scenes or someone who is isolated and simply people watching, they're just great narrative devices to set the scene and create a world almost in the blink of an eye. I mean, is that why you gravitate towards them? I mean, I always keep thinking about, everybody goes to Rick's place in Casablanca.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what readers like, and again, I'm a reader, so it's not any different for me, is to see what's behind the door that says no entry or no admittance or whatever, whether that's in a museum or the CIA or at Burger King. It's kind of like aspects of, and I used to work at Burger King when I was a kid, and so I like to do it for that reason and kind of show, because that is something I know something about. But also, I mean, they're just very common meeting places. It's also, just the logistics of writing a book. In a movie, you can have visual. You could put all the visuals in there, and it doesn't cost you a word of it or any time to have the visuals in the background to orient the readers. And as a writer, you really need to orient the reader in the scene. So if you have two people sitting at a table or sitting at a bar or whatever, people just instantly know what that scene looks like. You can describe it in just a few words instead of like completely painting the picture of what it's like in this 3D space that's important for some reason. And I've done a lot of action scenes in like nightclubs and stuff, because obviously that's very visual and visceral and kinetic, and there's kind of a three-dimensional element of a lot of my action, and so I like to do that. So I don't want to do the same thing all the time, as I keep saying, but I found myself at one point in my career having a little too many action scenes in abandoned buildings just for the simplicity of it all. and so now I like to try, I'm here in DC looking at very, very specific street corners and very specific just things at the canal and all these different things that I want to work into the story and make it feel like a very, a domestic espionage thriller.
Mark, actually staying on that tip as well, like immersing yourself in the scene. I have this, I never did it when before I had a kid, before we adopted our daughter. I never went away and just went by myself and immersed myself into some other culture. But I have this fantasy, Mark, of, maybe it's just because I do have a kid and I have a fantasy of leaving my family, said with all the love in my heart, but like to have a quiet moment to be creative. But I have a fantasy of going to like a small town, especially I write a lot of country music. So going to a small town, getting a little rental for a month and just walking around and sitting at the country store and sitting at the local restaurant, seeing people come in and out, or, you know, going off to Taos or somewhere. I have these fantasies. I've never done it. I don't know if the fantasy is better than the actual reality. I feel like if I actually did it, it would be a really lonely thing. I mean, I can't leave my family for a month, but I'm curious to you, like what, you know, you are very happy at home, so maybe you don't want to get away, but is that, and I know Allison comes with you, but the idea of going as a writer, the cliche writer gets a cabin in the woods, is that real, or is that what brings more perhaps writer's depression than necessary, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I did that for my first book for The Gray Man. I actually finished it in a cabin in the woods in Mississippi. And
I love that you had the cliche moment. Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, I did, and it wasn't as romantic as you would picture it.
Okay, good.
Because we've all seen Misery, and his wasn't very romantic either. But that's probably what it would happen. But I mean, the best places for me to write, bar none, are like a little coffee shop in London, in Knightsbridge, or in Hong Kong, or something where I can just sort of get there and get there in the middle of the action, but I always have headphones on with rain playing, so I'm not like distracted or disturbed. And I like doing that. Here in DC, I just basically sat on my balcony in my hotel and have done work like that. There's a fire station right down below, though, so like every 10 seconds, apparently something's burning in DC every minute. But
in more ways than one.
Yeah, exactly, and it's probably by the weekend it'll be more. But
yeah.
So the reality and the fantasy are a little bit different, but I mean, it really, there's nothing greater as a writer than to sit down at 6:30 in the morning or whatever, and then look at your watch and it's noon, and go, oh my gosh, I worked that whole time. I wasn't struggling to stay in my story, because a lot of time just the focus isn't there, and you just keep getting pulled out of what you're working on with other thoughts, and it's just, there's like this mindfulness that you need to be creative, where you can't just keep every 10 seconds doing something. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you that there's this idea that you could go just lock yourself in a cellar. And I think, like, I read that, like, Sylvester Stallone wrote Rocky in 3 days by basically locking himself in a room and not coming. You hear these stories that you don't know how apocryphal they are or if they're true. But, I think that keeps the dream alive for us. But, it's not always, the reality is not always as romantic as we make it out to be.
Well, I also think it falls under that category about the Zen painter, the famous story about the Zen painter, and the Japanese warlord says, "I want a perfect tulip," and he says, "Okay, I can do that for you. Orchid, I want a perfect orchid." And he said, "I need a month," and he goes out there a month later, and he comes in. He says, "Let me get you your orchid," and he sits down, and in 1 hour he draws the perfect orchid and gives it to him. And he says, "Why did you need the month?" And then he opens up the drawer, and he has 29 other pictures that he's been drawing, each one better than the next. A lot of people who type out that script in 3 days have been working on it for the better part of 3 years mentally and taking mental notes and all that kind of stuff. People always say, hey, I was an overnight success, as Lindsay loves to say. It just took me 7 years to get there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the reality.
And I beat myself up
17.
so much. I beat myself up so much because I want to write my book. My book's due in the end of July, and it'll be January and February, and I haven't written a word. And it'll be March, and I've written a tiny bit. It'll be April, and here we are in June, and I've written half of it, and it's due in 6 weeks. But
I have such anxiety right now. Oh my God!
And it happens every year because you just go like, nothing's clicking, but things are really sort of working in your head. And I really, in the past 10 days, have developed so much more of the story in my head, and of course jotted down notes, and I think I'm going to be cooking with the gas the last month. But you feel like you should have this pace of 1,200 words a day. I'll have it done on time, but it doesn't really work like that. There's days where there's days where I write backwards, where I have fewer words at the end of the day than beginning of the day, and it's very, very stressful. But you know, the process involves a lot of just like staring at the wall and going like, well, why would these people connect with these people in a way that's not completely cliche? And you know, you work on those little things in months, and for months, and then when you finally solve that problem in your head, you're like, all right, the dots are connected. Now you paint by numbers.
Just promise me one thing, Mark. Promise me you won't say to yourself 2 days from now, you know, I would have gotten this book done except for those meddling kids over on Road Gang Radio. I will not take the heat for that
Oh
one.
no, I'll take that. I'll be a part of the demise. Okay, Mark. A quick lightning round here. Okay, so your go-to writing snack or drink that's there on your table with you.
It's going to be a venti soy latte because I don't do dairy, but yeah, it's not very sexy. It's supposed to be scotch or something like that. Everybody says, every time I've drank and tried to write, I'm just don't want to write. I'm just like,
yeah, I end up going out.
Court blows up in his car.
I did it. Yeah.
Okay, what's the most quote unquote author thing you do that would make people laugh? Like, you know, fountain pen, index card, narrating your own grocery trip, whatever. What's something that
well, in my office, my writing desk is immaculate, and it's so perfect, and it's so cool looking with all this old world stuff and leather and blah blah blah.
And you never sit at it?
I never sit at it unless someone's there taking my picture, and they always want a picture of me at my desk, and I'll put my laptop there, and I'm like, this feels so weird. So that's kind of like, that's a complete affectation.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, the last one. What's the one conspiracy theory that you'd write about if you didn't care what anybody thought?
If I didn't care what anybody thought, probably that people high up in the U.S. government are actually working with the Chinese, something like that. Because, you know, I just feel like the desire for power in this world and the desire for money in the world, not necessarily the Chinese, but, you know, just like some, you know, the quote unquote good guys are actually completely in league with the bad actors, because there's just so much evidence of people doing anything for money and power, and so I would write about that.
So you basically write Angela Lansbury. I just want to make sure I'm straight on that.
Yeah, I would write Angela Lansbury.
Mark Greaney, of course, markgraineybooks.com is where you can find him and all of these wonderful books. They are continuing to show up, and they're continuing each one to be a new and different twist on the Gray Man, not to mention all the other great stuff, including Josh Duffy and the Tom Clancy novels. Good gosh almighty. Thank you for making the time during deadline time. We really appreciate it, Mark.
You bet. It was great talking to you guys, as always.
Thank you, Mark. Go have a great meal with Allison. Tell her we said hello, and
Happy Father's Day.
Get out of there by this weekend, hopefully, or at least be hiding in your hotel. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll be out of there by the weekend.
Thanks, Mark Greaney. Check it out, Mark Greaney Books.